The morning Robert Calloway's lawyer showed up at my door, I had feed dust on my jacket, a cracked heel on my right boot, and exactly no patience for anything complicated. It was barely past 7. I had already been out to check on 2 heifers who had been acting off since the night before, and I had not yet had coffee, which meant the world owed me at least one simple thing before noon. It did not deliver. The lawyer's name was Fenwick, a thin man with a briefcase that looked newer than anything on my property. He stood on my porch like he was worried the wood might give way under him. I recognized him from the county offices. Seen him once or twice at estate hearings other farmers had to sit through when things got ugly at the end. I said, "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying it before 8. He said, "I'm not selling anything, Miss Holt. I'm delivering a message from Robert Calloway's estate." And then he said Robert's name the way people say the names of the recently dead, quiet and careful, like the word itself was still tender. I stepped back and let him in. Robert Calloway had been my neighbor for 11 years. Not a close neighbor the way people in cities mean it, not someone I had over for dinner or called on Sunday afternoons. But the real kind. The kind who showed up when your fence needed 2 extra sets of hands without waiting to be asked. The kind who let you run 40 head of cattle on his south pasture for 3 months when the rains came in and flooded mine, and never once handed you an invoice. The kind who watched you work from a distance and did not say much, but when he did say something, it counted. He had died 6 weeks earlier. Heart, like his father before him. He was 63 and looked like he had been planning to work another 20 years. I sat across from Fenwick at my kitchen table with my coffee finally in my hands and listened to what he had to say. It took a while. There were papers, there were terms, there were phrases lawyers use when they want to make simple things sound enormous. But the core of it was this. Robert Calloway had left his ranch to his son, Weston. 800 acres, the main house, the equipment barn, the cattle pens, a working herd, and a trust account that Fenwick said, clearing his throat slightly, exceeded $1 million. I nodded, because none of that surprised me. Robert always talked about Weston in the way parents talk about the child they love the most and understand the least. He left, Robert told me once, leaning on a fence post with the sun going down behind him. Thought success had to look like something different than this. I never figured out how to argue him back. Then Fenwick got to the condition. To access the trust, Weston had to return to the Calloway property and operate it as a functioning ranch for 12 consecutive months, alongside a qualified cooperator. Someone with documented experience in agricultural management. Someone who could verify to the estate that the land was being actively and properly worked. Or, Fenwick added without inflection, he had to be legally married within 60 days. I stared at him. He looked at the table. I said, "That is either the most thoughtful thing Robert Calloway ever did, or the most stubborn." Fenwick said, "In my experience with fathers and sons, it is usually both." He left one more thing on the table before he went. A handwritten note, folded once, with my name on the outside in Robert's handwriting. That slanted, unhurried print that looked exactly like him. It said, "Nora, if my boy comes back and he is lost, point him toward the south pasture." That land always made things clearer for me. If he needs someone who understands what this place is worth, that is you. I am asking you to help him remember. I know it is a lot to ask. I know you have your own field to tend. But you are the only neighbor I trust to tell him the truth without making it easy. Forgive an old man for putting your name in a will. I hope you will understand why. I folded it back up and sat there for a long time after Fenwick's car was gone. I understood why. That was the problem. Weston Calloway showed up 4 days later in a truck that was too new and too clean for the kind of roads that led out to this part of the county. I saw him from the top of the water tank I was patching. He parked in my drive, got out, and stood looking at the property the way city people look at open land, like they cannot quite calculate where it ends. He was taller than I remembered. I had not seen him in maybe 8 years, back when he used to come home for summers before he stopped coming home at all. He had his father's jaw and none of his father's ease. I climbed down from the tank and walked over. He looked at me like he was expecting someone different. "Nora Holt?" he said. "That's what it says on the mailbox." He looked around. "You're running this place alone?" "Since my folks moved to town. For years now." I crossed my arms. "Fenwick came to see you?" He nodded. He came to see me. He told me about the note. He told me what my father wrote about you. He rubbed the back of his neck, and for just a second, he looked like someone who had not slept right in a week. I am sorry for asking this. I know you don't owe me anything, but I need help, and apparently my father decided you were the only person in this county worth asking. I looked at him. He did not look away, which I gave him credit for. What exactly are you asking? He exhaled. I need a cooperator. Someone who can verify to the estate that the Calloway Ranch is being properly worked. Someone whose name means something in this county when it comes to agricultural management. He paused. And I need them to mean it. Not just sign a paper. Actually be there. I said, and the marriage option? His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. I'm not marrying a stranger to satisfy a legal document. That's fair, I said. So it has to be the 12 months, he said. If you say yes. And if I say no? He looked out at my pasture for a moment. Then my father's note was wrong, and I'll figure something else out. He did not say it like a threat. He said it like someone who had already been told no by enough of the world that one more time would not break him. Just add to the stack. I thought about Robert leaning on that fence post. I thought about 3 months of free pasture when I had been one bad season away from selling off half my herd. I thought about a ranch I had driven past my whole life that deserved better than being sold off in pieces, because the only son who could save it had never been taught how to want to. I said, if we do this, I have terms. He said, name them. I said, you work, not you supervise while I work. You. Every morning. I will teach you what your father knew and you forgot, and you will learn it without complaining about what it costs your schedule. You do not make decisions about that land without talking to me first. Not equipment, not cattle, not suppliers. And you do not lie to me. Not once. Not about the finances. Not about what you know. Not about what you don't. I would rather hear the ugly truth at breakfast than find out the pretty version was wrong by noon. He stood very still while I said all of it. Then he said, agreed. We shook on it in my driveway with mud on my boots and city shoes on his, and that was how I became the cooperator of the Calloway Ranch on a handshake and a dead man's note. The first week was exactly as difficult as I expected and twice as revealing. Weston knew nothing. I do not say that cruelly. He had grown up on that land, yes, but the way children grow up around work without actually doing it, absorbing the shape of it without the weight. He could name the fields. He could not tell you which one stayed wet 2 weeks after a rain, or which fence line had been patched 7 times in the same spot because the post was rotting at the base and needed replacing, not patching. I showed him, anyway. All of it. Because that was the deal. The second morning, he showed up at the Calloway barn at 5:45. I was already there. He looked at me and said, do you ever sleep? I said, not in calving season. He learned fast, I will give him that. He asked questions constantly, which annoyed me at first, and then stopped annoying me when I realized the questions were the right ones. Not how do I make this look like I'm doing it, but why does the feed schedule change after the first frost, and what does it mean when the cattle bunch in the northwest corner before a storm, and how do you know when a repair is worth doing twice or worth doing right once? The answers mattered to him. I could tell. What I had not expected was Garrett. Robert's nephew had been running an informal arrangement with one of the back fields for years. Informal meant no paperwork, no lease, no payment beyond the occasional help during peak season. Robert had allowed it because Garrett was family or close enough to it, and Robert was the kind of man who kept peace through generosity. Garrett had a lawyer of his own now. He filed a motion to contest the cooperation clause in a will on the grounds that the named cooperator, meaning me, had no formal contractual relationship with the Calloway estate at the time of Robert's death. That was technically true. That was the whole problem. The morning Weston told me about it, we were standing in the equipment shed going over a repair list. He set the paper on the workbench and waited. I read it twice. My jaw went tight. He said, I'm sorry. I did not know he would move this fast. I said, what does your lawyer say? He says we need to formalize everything and fast. A signed co-management agreement with documented operational authority. Supplier accounts in both our names. Vet records, feed invoices, labor logs, all of it traceable back to me and to you together. I thought about what that meant. Not just paperwork. Presence. Visible, documented, undeniable presence on that land as a legitimate partner. Garrett's trying to prove we're not real, I said.
Yes.
Then we stop being anything other than real, I said. Starting now. That week I moved half my operation onto the Calloway property. Not because it was convenient.
Because it was necessary.
My name needed to be on every account, every delivery, every decision that could be verified. I called every supplier Robert had used and introduced myself as cooperator. I walked every field with Weston and took handwritten notes I dated and signed. I asked the two ranch hands, older men who had worked for Robert for years, to recognize us both in whatever decisions came from that land. They were cautious at first. Frank, who was older and had worked for Robert since before Weston was born, looked at me across the hood of my truck one morning and said, "Miss Holt, no disrespect, but Garrett's been around these pastures a long time." I said, "I know that, Frank. I also know that you have been around them longer, and you know the difference between someone who works land and someone who waits for land. Which one do you see standing in front of you?" He chewed on that for a moment. Then he said, "Two of them, actually." He looked at Weston when he said it. That was the first morning I saw Weston smile since he came back. Things shifted after that, not all at once. Small things. The way he started checking the weather at night instead of waiting for me to tell him in the morning. The way he learned which cattle were which without being reminded. The morning I found him already on the south pasture when I arrived, walking the fence line with a notepad, not because I had told him to, but because he had noticed a post leaning wrong the day before and wanted to catch it before it became a problem. I stood at the gate and watched him work for a minute before he saw me. His father's ranch jacket on, muddy already at the knees, writing in handwriting I recognized from the deed documents as looping and fast. I thought, Robert knew something I did not when he put my name in that note. Garrett came by the property on a Tuesday, which felt like a thing he had timed. He drove up in the middle of a feeding run while Weston and I were both in the yard. He had a man with him I did not know, someone with a clipboard who looked at everything like he was pricing it. Garrett was the kind of man who smiled with all of his face except his eyes. He said, "Weston, good to see you back." He said it like back was a word that meant something other than what it sounded like. Weston said, "What do you need, Garrett?"
"Just checking on things.
Making sure the place is being looked after." I set my feed bucket down. "It's being looked after."
Garrett looked at me.
Not mean. Measured. That was worse. He said, "You've been busy, Nora. Suppliers calling me, asking if the management structure has changed." I told them I was sure it was just temporary. I said, "It is not temporary." He tilted his head like he found that interesting. His clipboard man was writing something down. Weston moved beside me, and I felt the weight of it, that shift of position that said, whatever she just said, I am standing next to it. Garrett looked between us. "You two make quite the business arrangement," he said. Then he looked back at his clipboard man. "Let's go take a look at the south field." I said, "That field is under active management, and you do not have access without prior arrangement." His face changed then. For just a second. The smile stayed, but the ease under it went tight. "You don't have the authority to." "I do," I said. "Check the co-management agreement. My signature is on the operational authority clause. You want to walk that pasture? You call Weston's lawyer first." The clipboard man stopped writing. Garrett looked at Weston. "This your idea?" Weston said, "It is her field call." I said I'd back it. They left. Not angry enough to make a scene, but gone. And I stood there with my heart going faster than I would have admitted to anyone. Weston looked at me after their truck turned out of the gate. He said, "Where did that come from?" I said, "Same place your father learned it. This land teaches you what you're willing to fight for eventually. You just have to stay long enough to learn the lesson." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You loved this place. Not yours, this one." I looked out at the south pasture, the long roll of it going gold in the afternoon. I said, "I love what it was supposed to be. That is different." He looked at me then in a way he had not quite looked at me before. Not like I was the hired help, not like I was the neighbor filling in. Like he was seeing something real. He said, "I am starting to understand what he meant when he wrote your name." I looked away, because something in my chest had moved, and I was not ready to name it. The co-management challenge from Garrett's side came to a head in the 9th week. His lawyer filed an argument that the cooperation clause required demonstration of at least one full agricultural cycle under joint management, and that 60 days was insufficient to prove the relationship was substantive. Essentially, he was buying time, trying to push us close enough to the 12-month deadline that something would fall apart. Fenwick called Weston on a Friday afternoon. Weston came and found me in the barn where I was treating a cut on one of the older cows. He sat down on the gate rail and waited until I was done. He said, "They want a formal review. Third-party assessment of operational control. They want it next month." I said, "What kind of assessment?" "Someone from the Agricultural Extension Office. They review records, interview the workers, inspect the property, verify that the co-management is genuine." I wiped my hands on a rag and looked at him. "Is it genuine?" He held my gaze. "Yes." "Then we have nothing to worry about." He laughed once, low and dry. "You make it sound easy. Nothing about this is easy. That is not the same as saying it is not real." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Nora, I need to tell you something." I waited. He said, "I came back here planning to do the 12 months and leave. Get the inheritance, settle the estate, sell off what made sense to sell, and close out what didn't. That was the plan when I drove up your road that first week." I said, "I know that." He looked surprised. I said, "You had city shoes on and a truck with no scratches." I knew what the plan was. He shook his head. "And you helped me anyway." "I thought about your father," I said. "And I thought about what this land would become if Garrett got it." I did not say that part out loud because it would have sounded like I was taking credit for more than I deserved. He said, "The plan changed." I looked at him. He said, "Somewhere around week 4, when you told me to stop patching and start rebuilding, I started thinking differently about what this place could be. Not what I could take from it, what I could give back to it." He paused. "I think my father knew that would happen if I stayed long enough." I said, "Your father was smarter than either of us gave him credit for." Weston looked at the cow I had been treating, then at the barn wall covered in old gear and older tools. He said, "I don't want to leave when the 12 months are up." I did not answer right away. He said, "I know that was not the arrangement." I said, "The arrangement was 12 months. What happens after was never written down." He said, "Does that mean you're open to it?" I looked at him then, really looked at him. Mud on his jacket. Hands that had learned to work in 9 weeks. A man who had come back to a place he had run from and stayed long enough to remember why it had been worth loving in the first place. I said, "Let's get through the assessment first. Then we talk about what comes next." He nodded. But the way he nodded told me he already knew what the conversation was going to look like. The assessment came on a cold morning in late October. The extension officer was a woman named Caldwell who arrived with a clipboard that made Garrett's man look underprepared. She spent 4 hours on the property. She walked the fields, she checked the vet records, she reviewed the feed accounts and the supplier invoices and the labor logs. She talked to Frank and to the other ranch hand, a quieter man named Delbert, separately, without us present. Weston and I waited near the main barn. He did not pace. That surprised me. 2 months ago, he had paced the length of my kitchen 3 times before making a difficult supplier call. Now he stood with one hand on the fence rail and watched the far field like he was counting cattle in his head. I said, "You're calm." He said, "I know what we've done here. If that isn't enough, the documents were wrong to begin with." I heard Robert Calloway in that sentence. He would have said it the exact same way. When Caldwell came back, she looked at her notes for a moment, then at us. She said, "The records are thorough. The operational structure is clear. Both parties demonstrate active management across all documented categories." She looked up. "This is a legitimate co-management arrangement." Garrett's attorney received the same report we did. He filed one more motion, something about the spirit of the condition requiring physical residence on the property. Fenwick dismissed it in 48 hours. Robert's will was specific, and the record was clean. The inheritance transferred to Weston on a Tuesday in November. Fenwick called at 9:30. Weston was standing in my kitchen because we had been going over the winter feed order together, and the call came in while he was holding a coffee mug with both hands. He listened, said thank you, set the phone down. I said, "Done?"
He said, "Done."
I nodded and looked back at the feed invoices on the table. He said, "Nora, I looked up. He said the agreement was 12 months. We are at 9.
I know that.
So, technically, you are still obligated for 3 more. I said, I am aware of the terms. He said, and after the 3? I set my pen down. He was looking at me with that same expression he had in the barn, patient and direct, nothing hidden under it. I said, after the 3, we renegotiate. He said, to what? I said, to whatever this has been becoming since about week 4, when you stopped patching and started rebuilding. He set the coffee mug down slowly. He said, that sounds like more than a business arrangement. I said, I am aware of that too. He came around the table. Not fast, not careless. Deliberate, the way he had learned to do everything out here. He stopped close enough that I could see the line where the sun had weathered his face these past 9 weeks, the difference between the man who drove up my road and the man standing in my kitchen now. He said, I came back here to collect an inheritance. I said, I know. He said, I think I collected something else. I looked up at him. Outside, the winter was settling into the land in that slow, quiet way it did out here, the kind of cold that made everything stand still and honest. No noise, no performance. Just the fields and the fence lines and 2 people who had spent 9 weeks learning the weight of the same ground. I said, your father put my name in that will because he knew you would need someone who told you the truth without making it comfortable. He said he was right about that. I said, so here is the truth. I did not say yes to the 12 months because of what Robert owed me. I said yes because I thought the land deserved better than being sold in pieces, and I thought you might be worth the trouble of teaching. And somewhere around week 6, when you drove 40 minutes in the dark to fix a broken water line before the morning feed because you did not want the cattle going short and you did not wake me up to help you, I stopped thinking about the 12 months and started thinking about what came after. He was very still. I said, that is the truth. Ugly parts included. He said, that is the least ugly thing anyone has said to me in a long time. And then he reached up and tucked a piece of hair behind my ear the way people do when they are not thinking about the gesture, just doing it because they want to, and I did not move away because I did not want to. The Calloway Ranch kept standing. That winter, Weston filed plans to expand the South Pasture operation. He hired Frank full-time with a proper contract and brought Delbert on for the repair schedule. He called suppliers by first name. He stopped asking me before every decision, not because he had stopped trusting me, but because he had started trusting himself. Robert's note stayed folded in my jacket pocket for a long time. I took it out once on a cold afternoon while Weston was in town, and I was alone on the South Pasture with the cattle moving slow in the gray light. I read it again. That line about the land making things clearer. He was right. It always did. I was not looking for a man who needed saving when Weston Calloway drove up my road in his clean truck with his 2 new shoes and his father's impossible condition sitting on the passenger seat. I was not looking for anything at all except to keep my own place going and maybe get through calving season without losing any more sleep than necessary. But Robert Calloway had looked at his son from a distance for 20 years, the way fathers who love deeply and quietly learn to do, and he had understood something the rest of us were still figuring out. That the people who need each other the most are rarely the ones who know it at the start. They are usually the ones standing in someone's doorway with a folder of legal papers, not enough sleep, and no idea that what they actually came for has nothing to do with an inheritance at all. I folded the note back up and put it in my pocket. The South Pasture was green even in the cold, the way good land always manages to look when it is being cared for properly. The cattle moved across it steady and easy. The fence line held. And somewhere behind me, coming down the road in a truck that finally had some scratches on it, was the man I had agreed to stand beside for 12 months, who had quietly become the person I intended to stand beside after. I did not turn around right away. I just listened to the engine come closer. That was enough.